Good evening and welcome to Temple Emmanuel. I'm Paul Benson. I'm president of the Board of Trustees. Thank you for being part of this Greensboro Jewish community commemoration of Holocaust Remembrance Day. We are deeply grateful to Shelley Weiner for recounting her story with us today, as we all vow never again. As we begin, please check your phones. My phone just buzzed, so I turned it off. So please turn off your watches, your phones. We don't want any interruptions. I'd also like to point out the exits in case we have to leave the building. There are two up front. There's one around the corner in the boardroom. There's another one through this door. Take a right. All the doors lead to sidewalks, so there's no issues with accessibility, so that shouldn't be any problem. Please, again, look around, take note of your nearest exit. It's probably not the front door that you came in. Again, thank you all for joining us.
On this evening, I'll share with you all what I just shared with the descendants of survivors and survivors themselves who accompanied our Sifrei Torah from communities in Czechoslovakia which were destroyed during the Shoah, that what a powerful symbol to begin our ceremony tonight as we take these trees of life, these Torahs that were once in vibrant and alive communities, and we return them to their rightful place in the arc of our vibrant and alive communities with the descendants of those whose communities were destroyed. We reclaim our inheritance as an alive and thriving people, that tonight is not about death but about life and about our recommitment to the inheritance that we've been given as a Jewish people. We must not forget, and I will read a selection now. They must not be forgotten on the first page. We have gathered to remember with reverence and love the 6 million of our brothers and sisters who perished at the hands of Hitler. They lie and rest in nameless graves, their resting places in far-off forests and abandoned fields are now lost to the eyes of their loving families. Despite this, they must not be forgotten. We shall remember them in their pain and in their agony. We shall remember them as we would remember our own brothers and sisters, for we had lived with them in Europe. We would have died with them at Auschwitz and Buchenwald, Bergen-Belsen and Babi Yar, and Helmo and Treblinka. We remember them because the world would like to forget them, to forget how they cried for help and how their cries were ignored.
How they tried to escape, and how the nations would not give them refuge.
How they died in the camps, and how the nations ignored them.
They must not be forgotten.
We turn the page. They must live. But memorial lamps are not enough. What can possibly be enough? 6 million of my brothers and sisters were murdered, mothers and grandmothers, fathers and grandfathers, and children. Oh, so many children. They have died, but they must live. They remain alive in our hearts, share room in our souls, breathe with our lungs, sing with our voices, and dance with our legs. Though they have disappeared off the face of the earth, we must live with them every day. Were all the heavens made of parchment, and every blade of grass a pen, were all the seas to contain ink, and every inhabitant of the earth a writer, there would still not be sufficient words.
prayer of the heart, the sand and the sea, the rush of the waters, the crash of the heavens, the prayer of the heart.
We'll read the Hebrew, and then I'll read the English, and then you'll all read the responsive pieces of the following reading from Ezekiel chapter 37.
הייתה עליי יד אדוני, ויוציאני ברוח אדוני, ויניחני בתוך הבקעה, והיא מלאה עצמות.
The hand of God came upon me. God's Spirit took me away and set me down in the valley. It was full of bones. On the next page we all read, it was full of bones.
והעבירני עליהם סביב, סביב והנה רבות מאוד על פני הבקעה, והנה יבשות מאוד.
God led me all around them. There were very many of them spread over the valley, and they were very dry.
They were very dry.
ויאמר אלי בן אדם, התחיינה העצמות האלה? ויאמר אדוני אלוהים, אתה ידעת.
I was asked, O mortal, can these bones live again? I replied, O my sovereign God, only you know.
ויאמר אלי, הנבא אל העצמות האלה, ואמרת אליהם, העצמות יבשות, שמעו דבר אדוני. כה אמר אדוני אלוהים לעצמות האלה, הנה אני מביח בכם רוח וחייתם.
And God said unto me, prophesy over these bones, and say unto them, O you dry bones, hear the word of God. Thus said the sovereign God to these bones, I will cause breath to enter into you, and you shall live.
ונתתי עליכם גידים, והעליתי עליכם בשר, וקרמתי עליכם אור, ונתתי בכם רוח, וחייתם, וידעתם כי אני אדוני.
I will lay sinews upon you, and cover you with flesh, and form skin over you. And I will put breath into you, and you shall live again, and you shall know that I am God.
And you shall live.
וניבאתי כאשר ציוויתי, ויהי קול כי ינביא, וכאשר רעש, ותקרבו עצמות עצם על עצמו.
I prophesied as I had been commanded, and while I was prophesying, suddenly there was a sound of rattling, and the bones came together, bone to matching bone.
וראיתי, והנה עליהם גידים, ובשר עלה, ויקרם עליהם אור מלמעלה, ורוח אין בהם.
I looked, and there were sinews on them, and flesh had grown, and skin had formed over them, but there was no breath in them.
ויאמר אלי, הנבא אל הרוח, הנבא בן אדם, ואמרת אל הרוח כה אמר, אדוני אלוהים, מארבע רוחות, באי הרוח, ופחי בהרוגים האלה, ויחיו.
Then God said to me, prophesy to the breath, prophesy, O mortal, say to the breath, thus said the sovereign God, come, O breath from the four winds, and breathe into these slain, that they may live again.
וינבאתי כאשר ציווני, ותבוא בהם הרוח, ויחיו ויעמדו על רגליהם, חיל גדול מאוד מאוד.
I prophesied as I was commanded. The breath entered them, and they came to life and stood up on their feet, a vast multitude.
ויאמר אלי בן אדם, העצמות האלה כל בית ישראל למה? הנה אומרים יבשו עצמותינו, ואבדה תקוותנו, נגזרנו לנו.
And I was told, O mortal, these bones are the whole house of Israel. They say, our bones are dried up, our hope is gone, we are doomed.
לכן הנבא ואמרת אליהם, כה אמר אדוני אלוהים, הנה אני פותח את קברותיכם, והעליתי אתכם מקברותיכם, עמי, והבאתי אתכם אל אדמת ישראל.
Prophesy therefore and say to them, thus said the sovereign God, I'm going to open your graves and lift you out of the graves, O my people, and bring you to the land of Israel.
וידעתם כי אני אדוני בפתחי קברותיכם ובעלותי אתכם מקברותיכם עמי ונתתי רוחי בכם וחייתם.
You shall know, O my people, that I am God, when I have opened your graves and lifted you out of your graves. I will put my breath into you, and you shall live again.
והנחתי אתכם על אדמכם, וידעתם כי אני אדוני דיברתי, ועשיתי נאום אדוני.
And I will set you upon your own soil. Then you shall know that I, God, have spoken and have acted.
I will set you upon your own soil, and you shall live.
Friends, thank you so much for being here this evening. I feel like we've needed this for a while. And tonight we're about to hear a story from long ago. And we'll hear it from one of the most beloved members of our local community, our local Jewish community, Shelley Weiner. Shelley, we love you so much, and we are so grateful that we will hear your voice tonight. The story that you will tell happened in the 1940s. That was a time when the Nazis had a plan for the complete elimination and annihilation of our people. And what they did was not just a mere consequence of a terrible war. Rather, it was a different, separate kind of war, one against our existence. They called it the final solution. They were stopped, thank God, by the Allied forces, but not before they murdered 6 million Jews, 1 out of every 3 Jews alive at the time. Of that number, 1 in 4, 1.5 million were children. Shelley, we are so grateful that you survived. And yet think, everybody, think for a moment about the world that we live in now. In my 31 years as a rabbi, I cannot remember a time as serious as now for our people and for our world. We live in a world where the largest loss of Jewish life in one single day since the Holocaust, and it was massive, took place 212 days ago. Let us take a moment of silence in memory of the 1,200 who were killed during those unforgettable hours on that inexcusable day. And let us also remember that as we gather, 133 hostages are still being held by Hamas and their collaborators in Gaza. Let our people go now. I hope that the world understands that the denial of the crimes of October the 7th reminds us, the Jewish people, more broadly of the Holocaust denial that we Jews have faced for decades. And then there is the spike in anti-Semitism around the world and here at home. Tel Aviv University and the Anti-Defamation League just released their study documenting hatred against our people during 2023. These numbers don't even take into account the past 4 full months. Here's the headline. The U.S. saw a 103% spike in incidents fueled by the aftermath of the Gaza war, and those are just the cases that have been reported. France, which has the world's 3rd largest Jewish population, stands out with near quadrupling of cases. And we don't have to look far for confirmation of this, right? As rabbis, we hear about what is happening in our local private and public schools. No level is immune. College, yes. High schools, yes. Middle schools, yes. Elementary schools, sadly, yes. For some of our youth, the comments, the visible taunts, the harassing comments on social media and in person, and threats have been a constant. And our local Jewish institutions, each and every one of us has needed to respond to bomb threats. And at one time or another, we've had to evacuate our premises of children as well as of seniors. Israeli flags have been torn from people's homes. Property has been damaged and defaced. And the downtown monument dedicated to the women of the Shoah, pictured on the front cover of tonight's program and connected so meaningfully, Shelley, to you and to others, was defaced late last year. A swastika, the central Nazi symbol, was scrawled over the sole Jewish star on that sacred public memorial downtown. Last Yom HaShoah, I was in Poland as part of the March of the Living. Shelley, you've been on the March of the Living. If that program was important in the past, how much the more so is it important now? I hope that every rising high school junior and senior will join us next spring as we go to Poland and then to Israel. I should also mention that adults are also welcome to accompany us. Yes, last year I was in Poland. On Yom HaShoah, I was at Auschwitz. But this year, importantly, I'm here. We're all here. And there's something important about that. Ambassador Deborah Lipstadt, who's America's special envoy to monitor and combat anti-Semitism, she recently said that now is not the time for us to quiet our voices, to stop engaging others, to hide our Jewish stars. Now's not the time for that, and I agree. In my 31 years as a rabbi, as I said before, I cannot remember a time as serious as now. And you might think that I would be pessimistic, but I'm not. Because our people has always been more than what others try to throw our way. Because the Jewish people, our people, always finds a way to make it through. And because, friends, we, look around this room, we have each other. And one more thing, we tell our stories. They aren't always the stories the world wants to hear, but we tell them. The young speak, and the older listen. And, perhaps even more importantly, the old speak, and we, the younger, listen. And that's our sacred task tonight. May we learn from these words. May we grow from them. May we also strengthen one another to go from strength to strength. Friends, Am Yisrael Chai. If you want to, say it together with me. Am Yisrael Chai. And to that, let's all say, Amen.
Good evening. My name is Jenny Kaiser, and I currently serve as the president-elect of the Greensboro Jewish Federation. Tonight, I have the privilege of introducing our next speaker. Her story of surviving and following the survival following the Revna massacre in Poland during World War II is one that has resonated with me in many different ways. As a mother, as a daughter, as a woman, as a descendant of refugees fleeing pogroms in Ukraine and Russia, and as a Jew. Marrying into a family that escaped Nazi Germany taught me to appreciate how difficult it can be for survivors to tell their stories. It was only after the birth of our son that my husband's grandparents were able to open up about their own personal history. As hard as it was for them to tell these stories, it also taught me how important it can be to hear them, to remember them, and to share them, which is especially true today. As a documentary filmmaker, I believe these firsthand accounts represent our oral history and remain our responsibility to carry them forward to future generations. This is why I have such great admiration for women like Shelley. I encourage everyone here tonight to pay a visit to LeBauer Park in downtown Greensboro. Standing there, you'll find our first Holocaust memorial dedicated to the women and children who perished in the Holocaust. and it was designed by our very own Victoria Milstein. When I was in the process of making the film about the construction of the monument, it was the story that Shelley and her cousin Rachel Kisnerman shared that brought everything into clear focus. It reveals for us the bravery their mothers showed in order to keep them safe from the Nazis for more than 2 years, and the bravery it takes to tell these stories so that we ensure it never happens again. Shelley has been an inspiration to me and to everyone she meets. She is also someone I am honored to call a friend. Please join me in welcoming Shelley Weiner.
Hi, everyone. I know that most of you have probably heard my story before, and I know that some of you have not. So I will tell you about what happened to me as a very young child and how the strength of my mother and my aunt have me standing here today, because without their strength and their dedication, I would not be there. I'll start telling you the story about what I remember, and then I'll go through these posters that I have that Marilyn Chandler did for me when I got back from the Ukraine in 2013. Anyway, I was 4 years old. I was born in the town of Rovna, Ukraine, which is in the western Ukraine. And the first thing I remember is that my mother was packing us up to go on vacation. And I was very, very excited, running around. But then everything stopped. The Nazis came into our town. And as you well know, the Nazis passed rules, and most people will follow those rules. And the first thing that they did was that every Jewish person had to wear the Star of David, a yellow Star of David, on their clothes. And we were limited as to where Jews could go. We couldn't shop in the marketplace. We couldn't go to school. Most of the men could not go to work. My mother, who didn't look like a typical Jewish woman, and she came from a large family, as did my father. There were 7 brothers in his family, and she had 7 sisters and brothers in her family. And so she would put a raincoat over her Star of David and go to the market to shop for the family. I remember standing by the window and watching to see if she was going to be coming home. Because if someone had recognized her in the market, they would have informed on her, and even at that age, I knew that they would take her away. The next thing that happened that is very vivid for me still to today is that they wanted all the Jewish men to report for relocation duty. Well, my grandfather knew that that's not where they were going. They were beginning to start the camps, and that's where they were sending them in. So my grandfather lived next door, and he was one of my favorite people, loved my grandfather. So he was a builder, and he built a special hiding place in my mother's house where the men could come and hide and not report for relocation. And the women would fix the meal, the midday meal, and they would come out. My cousin and I, our job was to sit in the front yard, and we called them the brown shirts, the Nazis. That if we saw them stopping down the street or the neighbors or whatever, we were to come in and tell the men, and they would go back to the hiding place, and the women would clean up. Well, one day we were sitting outside and playing when we saw a Jeep with 4 of these brown shirts stop at our neighbors. We ran in and told the adults, and they all went into the hiding place, all the men, but my uncle, my cousin's father. I don't know why he couldn't make it. The next thing we knew is these 4 brown shirts came into our house, grabbed my uncle, and beat him till he was almost dead, bleeding all over. We 2 little girls, we were crying and screaming. They put us in a closet. Anyway, they took my uncle away. And that is when I really realized I was going to be afraid of these men. I was going to be afraid of any of those in their uniforms. The next thing that happened is they created a ghetto, and where the women and men were separated. I was living in a room with 20 strangers. My mother would go out to work in a factory, and it was very frightening. I was not allowed to go outside, and I would see through the window that anybody that they felt like shooting, the Nazi soldiers patrolling the ghetto would just shoot anybody. So, you know, even as a young child, such trauma stays with you. One day, my mother went out to work, and her Polish neighbor actually told her there was going to be an action. An action is when they gathered the Jews of the town and they dug ditches and they shot them. In Eastern Europe, most Jews were killed that way. More Jews were killed by this shooting than in the concentration camps. But anyway, and so my mother took me, I don't know, she never told me how she did it, and we went to the village where my aunt was living and where my mother really came from originally. My grandfather, there was a Ukrainian neighbor of my aunt's that she was very good friends with the wife, and my grandfather had tried to get him to take us and hide us, but he wouldn't, for no amount of money, no amount of jewelry. It was way too dangerous. Any non-Jew that wanted to help a Jew, if they found out, they would kill him and their entire family. This man had a teenage son and a teenage daughter. And he was not only that, but even if non-Jews wanted to help Jews, it was very difficult because the neighbors were always looking to see what was going on, and they would report it. Anti-Semitism in Ukraine and Poland and Eastern Europe has always been rampant. Well, I just found out when I went back to Ukraine that if someone turned in a Jew, they got 2 kilos of sugar. So it was not a big deal. Anyway, our mothers, my mother and my aunt, were begging this farmer to help us, to hide us. But I don't know how many of us would take that chance. Well, you know, the Nazis could not have accomplished fighting a war and eliminating all the Jews of Europe. And therefore, they had help from the local population. They would go to the villages and hand out pamphlets and ask the people in the villages to come to town and what they called work and help them whenever there was a roundup of Jews. Well, the farmer's young son of 18 and his friends, they thought, well, you know, they'll go into town and make some money. And so he went into town on the day that they were doing the massacre. And they gave them the jobs of collecting the bodies that didn't fall into the ditch. And they were so horrified that these young men ran back through the forest and decided to form a partisan group which would fight the Nazis, like blow up bridges and trains and so forth. Well, he came home just as our mothers were begging them to hide us. And he was the one that convinced his father and mother that they had to do it. And he, not only that, but he said, I'm going to come back. I'm going to be in the woods with the partisans, but I'm coming back every month to make sure they're still here. And so the farmer made a hiding place for us on top of his barn and put hay on it. And we had a small space where we could lie down. Well, I could stand up. We were little, but my mother and aunt could not. And what I remember from that time is how cold and how hot it was. We had just a little bit of air that we could, and light, and the mice and the lice were terrible. I would spend all night throwing them off my face, the mice. Well, one evening, it was summertime, the farmer came up and he told our mothers that they knew we were there. And this was the Ukrainian police, and that we had to go down. Well, our mothers said, can we take a few minutes to say goodbye to each other? And to this day, I don't know what possessed us. I was 5, my cousin was 6. We cried and we begged our mothers, don't you want a better life for us? Don't you want to see us get married? I don't know where that all came from. But because we knew that there was a back door to the barn, and the woods were just there, and we could go and run in the barn and let them try and look for us. And I don't know, but our mothers agreed, and so very quietly we came down and we ran into the woods. And that was the scariest night of my life, because for a short time we could hear them looking for us. And I don't know what happened, but something must have diverted them, and then it was quiet. And we spent the night hiding in the woods. At morning, the farmer climbed on his roof, and he saw us. We came out, and he said, called our names, and we came out. And he said, you can't go back to the barn because they'll come back. But the wheat was very high then. Says, you can go and hide in the wheat and we'll, see where we can find another place for you. Well, it was horrible. It was very hot. We had nothing to eat or drink. We would suck the grass to get some moisture. And we were there. My aunt got very sick. Anyway, the farmer came and found us. And what he did is he dug a bunker underground, covered it with leaves and trees and bushes, and he got tired of the Germans coming to take his wheat and his grain, and so he had already built one underground bunker to hide his grain and his wheat. And so he dug out another one for us. Well, being in that bunker was terrible. All we had was straw on the ground, and we had very little light and very little food. It was getting close to where the Russian and Ukrainian army was pushing the Germans back. So food was very, very scarce. We just had about enough to survive. And it was horrible in there. The mice and the rats were just unbearable. Anyway, a lot of people will ask, what did you do to keep yourself occupied? Well, when we were up on the attic, my cousin and I would play with the straw. We would make dolls, we would make animals, and we would listen to stories our mothers told us. I don't know how we kept so quiet, because there was always activity from the local police looking for Jews. We could hear them capturing people in the forest and shooting them and beating them, and it was awful. Anyway, February of 1944, our town was liberated by the Russian and Ukrainian army. And the farmer took our mothers into town to see if it would be safe for us to come. And he came back and he said, oh, it was okay, we could go to town. And so the next day, he took us in his wagon, he covered us with straw, and it was February, so there was snow on the ground. And because I'd been in the darkness for so long, I was blinded. I couldn't see at all because of the light and the snow. Anyway, we came back to our town and our mothers, and our house was still standing. And so we moved into the house. Well, I don't have to tell you what kind of shape we were in. I had to have my head shaved because of the lice. I couldn't walk because I had so many sores on my legs. I hadn't exercised. And I was sick. My aunt was sick. It was impossible to get a doctor. But again, I told you my mother was strong. She went on the street and kept looking for a doctor. And she found a doctor for me who prescribed medicine. And because it was dangerous to go to the hospital, you would die if you went to the hospital. So anyway, they were still bombing because we were in a railroad town. And the bombs kept falling, and I, again, tell you how tough my mother was, that sometimes we'd hide in our cellar, sometimes we'd go to the Catholic church in the cellar, and sometimes we would just run because we heard them so close. And once we were running through the fields, and the shrapnel kept hitting me, and I kept falling down, and I kept screaming to my mother, "I'm dead, I'm dead, I'm dead." And she said, "Shut up and run." So anyway, that was my mother. The bombs kept falling and destroying the town, and our mothers decided to take us to a smaller town where they weren't bombing as much. Well, the night after we left, a bomb fell on our house and destroyed it. Anyway, 1945 came, the war was over. My mother, she was the strong one, to help us, with food and everything, would go to the market again and cook. She was a good cook. And the soldiers would come and eat at our house. Well, it was communist then, and they wanted my mother to be an informer because, the soldiers would talk, so they wanted to know what they were saying. Well, my mother wanted nothing to do with that, but they really harassed her. They took her to jail overnight. They once took me to the police station. I don't know. Anyway, the war's over, 1945, and Stalin, who was head of the Soviet Union, made a decree that anybody who was born a Polish citizen could go to Poland. Poland at that time was not part of the Soviet Union. And so one of my mother's brothers came back from the war, and she and her brother and I went to Poland. My aunt and my cousin remained in the Soviet Union. Anyway, when we went to Poland, my father found us. He had been in the Russian army. In 1939, if you know all that geography from that area, Stalin and Hitler had made a pact, and the Russians came into our town. And they took all the men and sent them to Siberia because they were capitalists. And so after the war got heated up, these men were taken into the Russian army. And my father was in one of the toughest battles of the war, the siege of Stalingrad, where they starved the population for 9 months. At any rate, he would never talk about it, as many times as I begged him to tell me the story. But he was lucky. He came back from the war, and he went to our hometown, and they told him where we were, and he came to Poland. Well, what happened is that some of the Jewish people who survived in the concentration camps went back to their homes and wanted to reclaim their property and their homes. Well, the Poles did not like it, and so they organized a pogrom. If you know what a pogrom is, it's an organized killing. And they killed 60 people, 60 Jews. And so my parents knew that Poland was not for us. And so they made their way to the American zone in Germany. Well, when we got to the American zone, we were considered people without a country. No country would take us. And so we were put in what they called displaced person camps. We lived in army barracks, German army barracks, and it was the first time that I had a friend, the first time that I had a toy, and for me, that was total freedom. Well, we didn't have school because, people came and went. They couldn't organize that, but that was okay. Anyway, my parents were both Zionists, and at that time, Israel was not a state yet, and the British were not allowing Jews to come in to what was then Palestine. But there were illegal boats that were going, and if they captured them, they would send them to a camp in Cyprus. I have to tell you something else. Our DP camp was surrounded by a fence, and you couldn't come and go as you pleased. You had to have special permission. Anyway, I just found out recently that one of the generals that everybody admires so much, General Patton, was a virulent anti-Semite. He was in charge of the DP camps. And the reason that he put a fence around the camps is so the Germans that were left would not have to mix with the Jews. Anyway, he was taken off that job. He didn't have it for very long. So we were in one, ready to go on one of these illegal boats. My father got us a place. We're all packed and ready to go. I woke up in the morning and I had the mumps. And so we had to give up our spot. Unfortunately, that boat was captured by the British. There was some fighting on it, and they were sent to Cyprus. So then my parents had to make another plan. Well, my father knew that he had uncles in the United States, in Philadelphia and New York. By the way, my maiden name was Wiener, and I married a Wiener. Anyway, my father went to the Red Cross. He got the telephone books, and he knew the names of the uncles, and he wrote in Polish alphabet, which is like our alphabet, the English alphabet, in Yiddish, to I don't know how many letters. Don't forget, there were no copy machines. And one of his uncles in Philadelphia got the letter and said, I still have the original letter. This is my nephew, and they proceeded to sponsor us, and it took a while, because you had to guarantee a job, you had to guarantee a place to live, you couldn't be on welfare. And anyway, in 1949, we arrived in Philadelphia, actually Ellis Island. We were one of the last boats to come to Ellis Island. And we came on Columbus Day. So we could see the Statue of Liberty, but we couldn't get off the boat because it was a holiday. Anyway, we came to Philadelphia, and we didn't speak English. We didn't know much. And, I talked to a lot of schools and children, and they always want to know what was the first thing that impressed me, when I first got to the United States. And I must tell you, it was a car. It was a television set, because who thought they could send pictures through the air? And it was wallpaper. Anyway, so, I have to end this by saying that I never thought in my lifetime, and I've lived a long time, that I would experience the fear of anti-Semitism again. And I'm not afraid. I'm not, let me tell you. I have no fear. But just the fact that it's happening, unbelievable to me. I thought that we were safe here, although I always wanted to go and live in Israel, but that's another story for another time. And, to think, I know, we all know that it's been around since time immemorial. Anti-Semitism, we're just the scapegoats of the nations. But to happen here, I just, I would be asked that question. And I would always say, well, when the timing was right and the economy was right, it could happen anywhere. But I'm just taken back by everything that's going on college campuses, to think that these young people who really don't have the education to understand what they're protesting against are being so passionate about this. It's just something that I have a hard time believing. Well, everything. Thank you for being a wonderful audience and listening, and I'm Israel High.
Shelley, thank you so much. When we look in our program, friends, you'll see underneath Shelley's name there's a song that we have included, and then we have a few more prayers, and then we will conclude our time together. Gary Silverstein will play this song, the Yiddish words, Oifen Pripacek. They will not be sung, but you can see the translation there. This is a song that's usually associated with children of the Holocaust because it was a common song. It was one that kids growing up would have heard. It's about learning the building blocks like your alphabet or your aleph-bet, if you will. And when we hear this, we think of the children, we think of those who would have been with us, and we know that we're dedicating this evening, Shelley, to your story, but also to the memory of so many. So, Gary.
Please rise for our Yizkor prayer. Yizkor Elohim nishmot hakedoshim v'hatehorim shenehergu shenishchatu v'shenisrafu v'shenitbeu v'shenechenku al kiddush Hashem al yedei hanatzim v'ozrehem. Tiyena nafshotehem tzrurot bitzror hachayim im nishmot Avraham Yitzchak v'Yaakov Sarah Rivka Rachel v'Leah v'im she'ar tzadikim v'tzidkaniot shebegan Eden v'nomar. Amen. May God remember the souls of the holy and pure ones who were killed, murdered, slaughtered, burned, drowned, and strangled for the sanctification of the name by the Nazis and their collaborators. May their souls be bound in the bond of life, together with the souls of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Sarah, Rebekah, Rachel, and Leah, and together with the other righteous men and women in the Garden of Eden, as we say together, Amen.
Please remain standing.
El Malei Rachamim Shochein Bamromim Hamsei Menucha Nechona Tachat Kanfei HaShekhinah B'malot kedoshim u'torim kizohar harakia masirim et nishmot 6 million cholacheinu b'nei Yisrael anashim nashim ותפשנהרגו על ידי הנאצים ועוזריהם בגן עדן, תהא מנוחתם. בעל הרחמים יסירם בסתר כנפיו לעולמים. ויצרור ביצרור החיים את נשמתם אדוני הוא נחלתם וינוחו בשלום על משכבם ונאמר Amen.
O God, full of compassion, whose presence is over us, may the souls of the 6 million of our brothers and sisters who fell at the hands of the Nazi murderers and who have gone to their eternal home among the holy and pure, who shine as the lights of heaven, find perfect peace in your sheltering presence. Master of mercy, we beseech you, cover them in the shelter of your wings forever, and bind their souls into the gathering of life. It is God who is their inheritance. May they rest in peace in their place of rest, as we say together, Amen.
You may be seated. We turn to the second to last page. So we read, "We have lived in numberless towns and villages," as we come to the conclusion of our service this evening and vow to remember the stories that we heard this evening, that they should be a reminder to us to be upstanders against injustice and hatred in this world, that they are not in vain, but inspire us and live in our memory and in our actions. We read, "We have lived in numberless towns and villages, and in too many of them we have endured cruel suffering. Some we have forgotten, others are sealed in our memory, a wound that does not heal. 100 generations of victims and martyrs, still their blood cries out from the earth. And so many at Dachau, at Buchenwald, and at Babi Yar. What can we say? What can we do? How bear the unbearable or accept what life has brought to our people? All who are born must die, but how shall we compare the slow passage of time with the callous slaughter of the innocent, cut off before their time? They lived in faith, not all but many, and surely many died with faith in God, in life, in the goodness that even flames cannot destroy. May we find a way to strength of their faith, that trust, that sure sense of life and soul endure beyond this body's death. They have left their lives to us. Let a million prayers rise wherever Jews worship. Let a million candles glow against the darkness of these unfinished lives. I invite you to rise as we recite the Kaddish Yatom, the Mourner's Kaddish, together. Yitkadal v'yitkadash Shemei Rabbah, ve'alma tivrach yirutei ve'yamlich malchutei, b'chayechon u'yomechon u'chayei dachol Beit Yisrael, ba'agala u'bizman kariv v'imru amen. Yehi Shmei Rabbah mevarach le'alam u'almei almaya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh. V'yithadar v'yitalev v'yitalal Shmei d'Kudsha Richu. Le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata. Tushbechata v'nechamata. Damiran be'alma v'imru amen. Yehi Shlama Rabbah min Shamaya. V'chaim aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'yimru amen.
Oseh shalom b'mromav, u'yaseh shalom, aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'yimru amen.
So as we have remembered this evening, I'd like to ask right now if there are those who are leaders of the Jewish institutions of our community, those who serve professionally in that capacity as executive directors, those who are presidents of boards, if you please come to the bima right now to help lead this community declaration. And for those who are elected to official positions in our community, in our area, to represent us around our state and to represent us in the Congress of the United States, if you would also come forward at this time. Do not leave quickly this evening. Spend time talking to each other. If your hands are free, give a hug to someone next to you. Spend time, if you want to, coming up and talking to Shelley. Take a look at the candles here that were lit earlier this evening, which we have rearranged in the shape of the Hebrew word chai, a reminder of life. As we make this declaration together, we, the Jewish people of the Triad, North Carolina, have gathered tonight on this anniversary of the end of the days of terror for our people, to remember and to never forget. We realize that we as individuals and as a people must accept the responsibility of remembrance. However, we also realize that remembrance alone is not enough. We must remember, educate, and act to carry on the legacy of Torah to future generations, as well as to spread its message to the present one. We dedicate ourselves to an obligation to eliminate bias, bigotry, and racism, just as we dedicate ourselves to an obligation to pursue justice, compassion, and peace. We commit ourselves to the continued and creative survival of our people here and elsewhere, to the state of Israel, and the task of strengthening our community and its institutions. Am Yisrael Chai. Please remain standing as we face towards the flag of Israel. Together. Adonai oz le'amo yitain, Adonai yivarech et amo v'shalom. God will give strength to our people, and God will bless us and all people with peace. As together we all say,
Amen.
Amen. Friends, thank you again so much for being here this evening. This concludes our formal ceremony. And as we continue on, again, interacting with one another, may this be the start of a time of blessing and remembrance for all of us. Again, thank you.